Thanks. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to have you here. I just put it on speaker view and it's giving us a whole lot of Sue Ann. I don't think we want. She would like to be able to work without that. I want to introduce to you my friend Eric Elnes. And Eric and I go back 20 years perhaps now, I guess. Yeah. And when I met him, we were both part of a program called the Pastor Theologian Program through the Center for Theological Inquiry at Princeton. And it was a marvelous 3-year continuing education program where we had to write papers and present them. We all had freshman nerves with one another. And it was a kind of a ecumenical group. And we continue to stay in touch, some now, not as much as I would love to. But Eric and I became very good friends. And it was during that time that he was working on the Phoenix affirmations or finalizing them or something. And through his grace, at one point, he allowed our group to look at them and kind of help shape them in their final form a little bit, if I'm remembering correctly.
Oh, yeah.
And then he took off and walked across the country, bearing them with him. So Eric, just to get started, if you would, I'd like for you to just kind of tell us a little bit about the process of writing the affirmations, as well as the process of the book, as well as the crosswalk experience, just so we can have that before we come back to you with some of our questions and so forth.
Sure. And first of all, let me just say what a big fan of your pastor I am. He is, to me, is one of the very bright lights out in Christendom right now. And I've always really respected, Mark, your intellect, your heart. And Mark was a very, very helpful contributor to the Phoenix affirmations. He wasn't just some sort of a side person. And I've been to your church too. It's gorgeous, and what a wonderful location and wonderful congregation you have there. But I've been actually thinking about the Phoenix affirmations a lot more in the last year than I have for a while. I mean, I always kind of think about them, but with all of the talk about the rise of Christian nationalism, 20 years ago there were a group of us, Mark included, that thought there was a 4-alarm fire already going with respect to this movement, and then if something dramatic didn't happen, we could really be in bad shape years from now. So I've thought, wow, it's been a long time coming, and some of us were aware of this a long time ago, and we're already working to try to do something about it. The actual kind of the way this all came about actually was was from an experience I had in that pastor theologian program that Mark referred to. We were on retreat just outside of Portland, Oregon, actually, at a Presbyterian retreat center there, and I was literally getting up in the morning, putting on my pants when I had this really brief mental image that flashed in my brain and made me laugh. And it was of a group of people who had decided to do something about all this and had written up a document of kind of core principles of what it means to be a progressive, quote unquote, Christian, and were walking them across the country to nail them at the doorway of America, a la Martin Luther, kind of thing. And I thought that was hilarious. And I remember sharing it with colleagues, saying, it wouldn't be funny if, ... And I didn't find it too funny after that retreat because I couldn't get the darn idea out of my head. And I was part of a clergy group in the Phoenix area. That I was serving a church in Scottsdale, Arizona, that was dedicated to LGBTQ equality and speaking as clergy in that area. And we got to talking about, maybe we need to expand beyond just talking about one issue. There's a kind of a whole, ecosystem of things that really make for a more, what we were calling a progressive spirit. I should say that the word progressive at the time, this was in 2004, that was just starting to be used for Christians. And the old language is liberal and conservative, and now they got this word progressive, and well, what does that mean? And some of us thought that the word progressive could mean it's an authentic third path. It's neither conservative nor liberal. It's this authentic third way that's not on that kind of binary rock'em sock'em robot kind of, bashing heads all the time. And we were also, even though we were part of the more, quote unquote liberal, side of the church, more mainline anyway, and moderate, we were also kind of tired that those on that side of us, this side of the kind of theological swimming pool, we were really, good about decrying what we're against, but we weren't really good about talking about what we're actually for. And so we decided, let's make this a positive statement, not a negative, statement against people so much, and really talk about what's the joy of our faith, and really trying to articulate what progressive Christianity, could be. And so those 12 affirmations came. We started with a discussion with this group in Phoenix, but then, as Mark kind of indicated, that fairly swiftly then moved beyond just our clergy group in Phoenix into like the clergy group that was part of the pastor theologian program, also other biblical scholars and theologians from around the country, really, and lay people as well. The Phoenix affirmations, I wrote the first draft, and it was 9 pages. Everybody thought maybe we ought to reduce the size of it a little bit. How about a page, Eric? So I did my best to put it on a page, but that thing, the Phoenix affirmations actually went through 27 major and minor revisions before we locked it in at we called it version 3.8. And I like to have the version number on it because it's meant to indicate that these are not like God's new word to the world that are never meant to change. And so they can be changed in time. They haven't been amended yet, but they always could be. We didn't want to say this is like a new creed by which you could be tested for your faith, like you're in or you're out. We call them affirmations because they're simply affirmations. Some people will agree, some people won't, but it doesn't mean that you're Christian or not Christian based on whether you agree with the affirmations or not. And anyway, so that was kind of the background. We ended up walking them across the country in 2006, and there was a lot of nervousness that they would need more. The country would need more than 12 affirmations. They need some sort of commentary on it. They'd want to, if they're kind of intrigued by this, they would need a commentary. So that kind of fell on my shoulders to write the first commentary on the Phoenix affirmations, which is the book you've been studying. And then after the walk, I released another book that was described that walk across the country and was organized according to the 12 Phoenix affirmations, and called Asphalt Jesus. And there was a documentary film crew that came with us as well. And they produced a film called The Asphalt Gospel.
Great. Now you are part of the UCC denomination, and notably, whenever our interfaith group would get together, you were the one version of Christians that didn't know the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed, because you guys are not creedal, you're non-creedal. And of course, being Presbyterian, we have our book of confessions, and we've always been a bit of a propositional group people. How does it feel to you embracing affirmations as someone who inherently is non-creedal? I heard you a little hesitant to say this is what you have to believe. So talk to us about a way we can think about the word affirmation and the collected affirmations in here.
Yes. Well, and to be clear, the UCC is a non-creedal church, but we do affirm the use of any creeds. And of course, I was aware of the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed. But we don't believe in the UCC in tests of faith. So we don't have any set of principles by which you could be excluded from the denomination. But we do, the denomination itself has an affirmation of faith that's quite beautiful and eloquent. But that affirmation of faith is simply a voluntary. You can affirm it voluntarily. It's not meant to initiate you into the United Church of Christ or confirm your membership there. And it really comes from the Congregationalist heritage that we share in the UCC. We go back to the Pilgrims, and of course the Pilgrims were people who were reacting or really escaping from persecution based on doctrines that they didn't share. And so from the very, very beginning, Congregationalists were not too wild about doctrines by which you could be persecuted. And in true congregation, like the polity of the congregational church is set up to reflect that, so that the highest authority in the congregational church is the local congregation. There is no higher authority than that. And so the belief is that the Holy Spirit, like we can never, be positive we've got this, we've got the Spirit's word to us. However, there are ways that we feel are maybe your chances are better. And it is that through like having a pope that, comes down from on high, or is that from a bishop, saying this? And the Congregationalists felt that the best way to discern the Holy Spirit's will for any congregation is through the congregation itself, praying, studying something, and then coming together in a congregational meeting, talking it over face to face, and then voting, and then whatever was the majority. It wasn't a guarantee that that's the Spirit's will for the congregation, but it was a better indication of the Spirit's will than if the minister says, "Hey, you're going to follow me," or a bishop, or what have you. And so that's where Congregationalism has been at, and it's actually kind of is what's informed democracy in the United States, was that idea, even though the Congregationalists themselves weren't always the best proponents of their own ideas.
Right. Yeah. So Martin Marty once said that virtually every congregation in the U.S. it thinks itself to be Congregationalist, even if they're not. So you guys are winning so far. Okay, so let me just tell you very briefly what we've been doing, and then I'm going to step back and just open the floor for questions. So throughout the summer, we've been taking the affirmations week after week. And of course, there are 13 weekends in a quarter like that. So the first weekend, we talked about the great command, loving God, neighbor, and self, and how all three of them are important components. And then we spent the rest of June talking about the first four affirmations of loving God. July was all about loving neighbors. August has been about loving ourselves. Beautiful. And this group has been showing up week after week because in addition to that, we've been reading the book. So I've been preaching on the affirmation, sometimes drawing on some of the scriptures that were on progressivechristianity.org that had the list. Sometimes drawing on the ones that came to my mind, and I didn't pretend to be speaking on your behalf as I was preaching, but I was, preaching toward the affirmation and the scriptures accompanying that. The Wednesday discussions have been more about specific to the book itself. And on behalf of the group, we have really appreciated your own self-disclosures throughout, and the thoughtfulness that you put into the affirmations week after week for us. So that's where we are, and this is our last time together doing this. And so do you have any questions you wanted to throw out to Eric while we're here? Yeah.
What was a typical day like in walking across America? Was every day planned, or did you just kind of wing it? And were you accepted?
I tell you, it was the last thing we did was wing a walk across the country. It was a lot of planning. In fact, the hardest year of my life, of my entire life, was the year before the walk. I felt the walk was actually the easy part of that whole thing, because we had quite a number of volunteers from quite a lot of churches, including my own in Scottsdale, who then were working on planning the route. Back then, the technology wasn't like it was today. There was such a thing called Google Earth, but it was like the most low level, looked like a Pac-Man kind of game or something. And we had people flying across the entire, searching for routes, using Google Earth to try to sort this out, because there was no Google Maps. We could just push the button and said, form us a walk route, and in 2 seconds we would have had this. No, this took us months to figure out what's the best walk route across the country, and then where are we going to stay? Staying in hotels would be really expensive, and plus you're just kind of off to yourself. We decided we're going to stay with churches, church people, and So we had 150 churches across the country who helped support the walk. And that meant then reaching out, to find these churches, then to find the churches finding members to put us up, then. And so we started the walk, and we had 6 core walkers and a surprise guest walker. So we told people you could join us for a mile, 10 miles, the whole way, whatever, as long as you provide your own stuff. We're happy to have you come and join us for however long you want. And the day that we were leaving for the walk, this person who most people would say he's homeless, he would correct that and say he was voluntarily houseless. A man who walked from Oakland, California, showed up in Phoenix, Arizona, saying, "I'm here for the whole walk." And I'm like, really? How are you? And sure enough, he was with us for the entire walk. And typical day, we were divided up into 2 walk teams. So each walk team, like had a morning and afternoon team, and each team was responsible for approximately an average of 13.5 miles per day. And then cumulatively, we did 27 miles in a day. And then we took Sundays off to do speaking, usually in churches, preaching, teaching, that kind of thing. And we had our own Sabbath day was on Wednesdays. Generally, we would actually just have a true day of rest. And it took 4.5 months then to complete that, that walk across country.
Wow. You met with Fred Phelps.
Actually, I wish. No, we were expecting to have him come at us, full of attack when we got to Kansas. And then I learned that he actually was laying low because he had some sort of serious illness. So I almost wanted to send him a get well soon card, because I was looking forward to being attacked by Fred Phelps. Actually. But that, it's funny you mentioned that, though, because that speaks to some other thing. We kind of went out with this kind of Bay of Pigs mentality. We thought like all of the oppressed masses who have been oppressed by this kind of growing religious political conservatism would kind of rise up, and if we just kind of waved a flag for a more progressive and generous spirited Christianity. And what we found was we could get on the front page of the news on any town of 400 members or citizens and below. But the day we walked through Kansas City, for instance, religion did make the front page of the Kansas City Star, but it wasn't progressive Christian walkers walking for peace, love, and inclusion or anything. It was Jimmy Baker, the televangelist, has been out of prison for 2 years, and he's doing great in Branson. And we found that the media were basically fundamentally uninterested in a more progressive spirit of Christianity. If we're going to hold up "God hates fag" signs, or we're going to burn Qurans, we could get all the publicity we wanted to. But that just wasn't going to happen. And so we ended up being pretty disappointed with the level of like national or major regional publicity we had, which then led to us realizing that if we want to tell the story the way we feel the Christian story should be told, we can't rely on the media to do it for us. We need to become the media. And so that actually led later to it was actually when the day we walked through Kansas City was the first day in world history that a broadcast quality television program aired on the internet, because the internet was just starting to get like we could do video that wouldn't just like if you had broadband, it would just be stuttering and stuff. And it was called Amazon Fishbowl. It was created by Amazon, and Bill Maher was the host. And I saw that news report and thought, that's interesting. The internet is way cheaper to do produce media on than media, traditional media. Costs a lot less, and your world, you could reach the world rather than a local market. We in the more progressive Christian community, like fundamentalist Christians, have billions of dollars invested in global satellite networks and radio stations and all this. we don't have those kind of resources in our flavor of Christianity. We're relatively poor by comparison, but we could, I figured that the internet and television, at some point they were going to collide. And when they did collide, the internet would totally win. And of course, that's proven itself to be true. And so we decided to create an broadcast quality internet television program. It took a couple of years to get that done, but in 2011 we started broadcasting from my new church in Omaha, Nebraska, a program called Darkwood Brew, and that broadcasted for 5 years, a weekly internet television program. It was actually the world's first interactive broadcast quality internet television program. We were actually interacting live with our guest. Mark was part of that. You were a guest, or you frequently showed up, on that program too. And so that was pretty fun too to create.
All right, let's I have a couple of questions I'm going to squeeze in before we're done, but Beryl has a question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, welcome. That's been really exciting to study this book. I appreciate it very much. I'm kind of wondering why you started with the number one that you started with, which seems to me to be maybe the most difficult and most controversial. Our Presbyterian Church had a schism some years back, and I think there would be folks who went out of the PCUSA who would have a hard time with that first one, but I think you started with a very difficult one. Can you say more about that?
Boy, that is like the best question you could possibly ask. I think actually that's a really interesting one. Yeah, so boy, there's a lot to this, but first of all, when we were walking, like one of the insights from this clergy group that was dealing with LGBTQ equality was that we realized there was a lot of power by speaking not as an ecumenical group, but as specifically as Christians, and not just any Christians, but clergy specifically on LGBTQ equality, because back in the mid-90s, that was pretty controversial, and we didn't want to be perceived as fringe. And so we did our work as clergy, and walking across the country as we were trying to own the Christian thing. Like, this is a problem within Christianity that we're trying to solve. We're not trying to solve Buddhist problems or Jewish problems or Muslim problems or anything like this. We're going to be Christians, but for our flavor of, Christian, they usually are asked, well, are you who are you including? Why aren't you including Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims? And it's like, well, it's because we're the ones causing the problems. We're trying to solve a Christian problem that's causing problems for other faiths, but we need to own our problems. But we also wanted to signal right from the get-go to these other communities that we're not claiming that Christianity is the only game in town. Then we don't think we're the only ones. And so we thought, even though we knew that would be probably the most controversial affirmation, and it has proven to be in time the most controversial of the 12, even amongst Christians who would come after us over LGBTQ equality, for instance, they'd react to affirmation 5. They'd say, but our real problem is affirmation 1. And so we wanted to put that up front to make it clear where we were. Now, there's more to that story too. Many of us, and myself very much included, feel like a lot of the problems that we're facing within more conservative strains of Christianity. And by the way, I think more liberal strains have plenty of problems too. So I don't mean to imply there's one half that has the problems, the other half doesn't. But one of the more difficult ones is that this feeling that this Christian exclusivism that says, everybody says, hey, didn't Jesus say, I am the way, the truth, and life? No one comes unto the Father except through me. Doesn't that mean it's Jesus's way or the hell way? And that's not the way that we interpret that statement at all. We understand that, I'm going to say we, I mean, I'll just make it an I statement. I know there were others. I can't speak for everybody, but really felt that what Jesus was indicating, and that what is indicated that statement is not a religion or Jesus himself even. Jesus is always pointing beyond himself to this higher thing, in which he's talking about a way of life that connects us to the divine. And if we ask, what is the way of life that connects us to the divine? He tells us, he doesn't just simply say anything goes, just choose your own flavor and you can connect with God. So we weren't at all about saying, hey, just anything goes. Jesus says, the most important commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And he says there's another one like it, love your neighbors yourself. So that's where we get the three great loves of the Phoenix affirmations, from love of God, love neighbor, and love of self. But and so that's that's the core of the way of life that Jesus came and lived and taught and died for and embodied. But there's also, I call that three G's, the three great loves. But there's also one more G to that, I think, which is grace. I mean, Jesus, if if he shows nothing else, it was this truly amazing grace. And I call that a 4G way of life. That is the way of life that Jesus has talked about that connects us to God. If you're going to say, hey, I'll love God and I'll love myself, but not my neighbor. 2 out of 3 of those 3 great loves ain't bad. Good luck connecting to the divine. Or if you're going to say, I love God and my neighbor, but not myself. I mean, they need to work organically together. But also, if you're not going to either receive or give grace, good luck connecting to the divine. So we really felt that these 4 G's are kind of what connect us most centrally to the divine. And back in the day, the Phoenix affirmations were written, we were really concentrating on those 3 G's, the 3 great loves. It's been more in later reflection, I've thought about, well, there's actually this one more, and it's the grace thing that seems to be part of that way of life. And so that I call myself, by the way, in the last couple of years, I've actually drifted away from calling myself a progressive Christian. I think that term has seen its day in the sun, and it's really become so politicized, and so associated with just a bunch of angry Christians that are only ever decrying what they're against, that I don't care to use that term anymore. I call myself a Christian pluralist, and I define that according to affirmation 1. I embrace fully the path of Jesus without denying the legitimacy of other paths that God may create for humanity. And that's what I love about this path, is that you can see those 4 G's reflected in other faiths. And I don't know if Mark has mentioned this, but my last long-term pastorate was in Omaha, Nebraska, which houses the Tri-Faith Initiative, where a church and a mosque and a synagogue all they sold their buildings and moved to a 38-acre commons and built separate worship facilities and a common center to move beyond interfaith dialogue into interfaith community. And the Christian church was my church. We did that. And to be able to exist in very, very close dialogue with Jews and Muslims was all the more evidence of this 4G way of life. It really made us all better Christians in my church by interacting with Jews and Muslims, because they had their own ways of working out these 4 G's that were very interesting and actually deepened our own connection to those values.
Great answer. Other questions from the room? Yes, Jerome.
This is much lighter, of course. The question was brought up, the conversation in affirmation 10 between Linda and Janice.
Mm-hmm.
Is that real?
Is that a real conversation between a real Linda and a Janice? Talk to us about that conversation.
It's an absolutely real conversation. The 2 people were not actual biological people. It's actually one way of writing that I've stopped doing. The Phoenix affirmations, there's a couple conversations that were meant to summarize years of experience, but they weren't. They were more mythological characters than actual reals. I actually don't write that way anymore. I just write about, if I write about a person, it's a real person, unless I tell you this is a fictitious person. There might be something in the introduction. I may have said that in the introduction. I can't remember.
That's okay. Yeah, we were just, because we understood that you don't want to break confidence with somebody that's told you their story. You weren't there in the story, so you're not giving us a blah 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 description. Yeah. But talk to us a little bit about the process that goes from ongoing conversations of this sort, into consolidating it into a back and forth conversation, so that it's not so complicated and out there.
Yeah, and you bring up one of the main reasons I did that back then is because if you write about a real person, you've got to blur the boundary so much that you can't tell that you're writing about that person anyway. So I had definite people in mind when I was writing that and definite conversations I was drawing from. My main concern in that chapter was I wanted to give people who are more liberally oriented a view into a more conservative worldview and what's really motivating them to speak out. Like we keep thinking that, why don't they accept evolution? Are they stupid? Do they just deny science? And all this. And it's like, no, this is not a scientific argument that's being made for this. It's a theological one. And that's one thing that we frequently overlook. And this kind of gets into that, what I was starting to get into the answer to the last question, but I kind of diverted from it. It's this fear that if you don't believe in, or if you don't please the God of your understanding in a particular way, that this God of love will burn you in hell, torture you for all of eternity. That is if you take that seriously, if you think you might even think that's a quote unquote crazy thought, but if you think that there's a 2% chance that might be true, then like that is deeply frightening, to be tortured for all of eternity by your God. And so it creates this, I think that's what motivates a lot of much more rigid theology, is that the fear that if you drift just slightly from what is considered to be orthodox by your community, you might just be unattaching yourself from Jesus. And if you unattach yourself from Jesus, then you're going to be burned in hell for eternity. And that's what I see very much motivating a lot of the denials of evolution and things like this, is that it's part of this drift away they perceive from the Bible, which is a drift away from Jesus. And I just don't think that it's either one, but that's where we need to really be focusing. I had a conversation with years after writing the Phoenix Affirmations with Frank Schaeffer, who was his father was Francis Schaeffer, who was really the main architect of modern day fundamentalism, the intellectual architect of modern day fundamentalism. And Frank has since had a kind of and he took over the movement and was even more of a jerk than his father was. I really disliked him a lot. But Frank had a change of heart, and we became really good friends. And I invited him to speak at Countryside Church in Omaha when I was there, and we had this kind of dialogue about what does every progressive Christian need to know about their fundamentalist neighbor, relative, boss, or spouse. And when the subject of creationism came out, I was very intrigued by Frank's response. He said most of people who affirm evolution think that, these things, people can be persuaded by science, but it's really more of a pastoral issue when you talk to your fundamentalist friend about these things, because they have read enough, Discovery magazines or seen enough Nova episodes to realize that they might just be wrong about this whole creation versus evolution thing. And it has absolutely struck them in their, like, to the core with fear. And like, there's this death of their faith. And so when we saddle up to them and say, listen, if you just pay attention to science, it's kind of like, this will be fine. You'll be fine with this. He said, it's like coming up to somebody who's just lost their mother saying, hey, everything's gonna be fine. If you just, in the end, she'll be well. You just want to hit the person. and that we need to be able to think the way people who are on the other side of the theological swimming pool think of the way they think, and feel the way they feel, so we can connect to them on some real and emotional level. It's not just an intellectual level.
Okay, that's a good segue for me to ask my next question, but I don't want to butt in front of anybody who's ready to ask. Okay, here I go. So Eric, you were at Scottsdale when I first met you, and for everybody in the room, Eric's church took a very creative approach to worship planning. They had theater folks, they had musicians, they had dancers, poets, and every worship service was an event. It was it was kind of incredible and fairly exhausting for me to imagine all of the work that went into that.
Yes.
This was the time when a lot of pastors would pick their scripture and their sermon title, and a lot of choir directors would pick 3 hymns, and somebody would write prayers. The associate pastor would have to write the prayers, and all of it came together on the secretary's desk without much coordination at all. And Eric's congregation was like the huge antithesis of that, with weeks of planning. So that was a fairly innovative thing that they did. He had a retired jazz professor, Chuck, who was on, yeah, and we still use a lot of Chuck's arrangements for different things, and Chuck kind of helped direct the direction of the music. So it was really exciting. And then you moved to Omaha, and that's where he started that series called Darkwood Brew. My wife and I that was our first experience of watching church online, because it was Sunday afternoons, and I could exhale from all my preparations by that. And again, you had a jazz trio that offered the music, some excellent musicians, and they would interview different people. I went to Omaha once to be interviewed, and another time kind of called in for an interview. I think I was a stand-in because somebody didn't show up. But it was very innovative, also very expensive, but very innovative. And then under your leadership, the Omaha church sold its property, and it was a big deal. It was a large church.
It was 1,700 member church, and it's the congregation that decides. It's not the minister or a bishop, so the congregation has to vote for that. Yeah,
right. So you had that, and then you did part of they had the Tri-Faith Initiative. Now, the Phoenix affirmations are affirming things that we believe. It's about things we think.
mm-hmm.
And you were just talking about the need to communicate with some of our more conservative siblings at a level that's not just thinking, but also feeling, touching the fear that people have, and so forth. If we take the Phoenix affirmations from here, so we as a group, as a church, we've walked through them all, we've considered them. I would tell you, when I read I think it was the 11th affirmation about keeping our prophetic voice and not being too aligned with political movements, when I read it at the beginning of worship, the congregation applauded. Just and we're Presbyterian, doggone it. So there's been a lot of communal affirmation to what we're doing here. But again, these are affirmations, they're thoughts, they're presentations, they're propositions. And I talked to us a little bit about where it goes from here, because with this spirit, you did some innovative things at Scottsdale, and I'm sure there was some degree of pushback. With this spirit, you did some innovative things in Omaha, and I know there was some degree of pushback. And man, I don't want to focus on the negative stuff, but I do want to just say, what if a church wants to live into these affirmations in the way we worship and engage in the community, structure ourselves, present ourselves, and so forth? What are some of the things we need to consider and imagine and be ready for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really can't speak for all churches. I think I have less to say about what like all churches should do, and more about what I try to do. So to me, like, I think that we are in the greatest existential threat to human existence that we've ever been in since humanity became humanity. That in the next 50 to 100 years, the chances are pretty good that we could either become extinct or at least seriously damage the human population and human civilization through one of several ways, either nuclear, ongoing, nuclear threats of some sort of cobbled together World War III, through climate change, and I doubt we would become extinct from it, but we could certainly collapse human civilization through it, or through unintended consequences of scientific discovery. It could be AI, it could be, all kind of stuff. It's like John Stewart said, maybe the last word that will ever be uttered will be from a scientist who says, "Oh, it worked." But in any case, I really do think that we are in greater danger as human civilization than we ever have been. But I also believe in a God who is, very real, who is far more aware of us than we're aware of us. And because of that awareness, and despite that awareness, loves us all without exception beyond our wildest imagination. And so I do not expect a God to be looking down from the heavens at the state we're in, saying, "Hey, lots of luck to you. Let me know how that works out." I really think that the Holy Spirit has been actually very much being poured out for more than a century, actually, to prepare us just for this time, to meet the greatest crisis that human civilization has ever faced. And I think that part of what the Spirit is doing is really, really joyful and magical to me, because I think what the Spirit is doing, obviously this is a faith statement, not a scientifically grounded statement, but I think the Holy Spirit is calling upon all the religions, all those sheep that are not of Christ's fold and Christ's own fold, to come together to share their gifts, because we've each of the faiths have been given great gifts that can lead to the sustainability of human life and to the thriving of human life. But we're all kind of like that, that mythological, that's that Buddhist parable of the blind people and the elephant. We have a piece of the story, to it, but we don't listen to each other. We don't, and other people have, parts of the story that are really profound and wonderful. And so to me, where I'm kind of looking at is my next kind of creative binge, as you could say, is to form a distinct public identity as Christian pluralist churches that are only defined like by affirmation one. We're not saying this faith is valid, this faith is valid. We're just simply saying Christianity is our faith. We claim Jesus' path, but we're not denying the legitimacy of other paths that God may create. And I'm actively asking, what would a Christian pluralist church be looking like that is different from a normal church? And to me, it comes down to those 4 Gs. What I want to do is help people have an experience like I had on the Tri-Faith Commons. When you could sit down with an imam and a Muslim imam and a Jewish rabbi and have a conversation, extended discussion about Jesus's own parables. Like, okay, I have a PhD in Bible from Princeton Theological Seminary, and I've been studying the parables professionally for over 30 years. And yet an imam and a rabbi I found would regularly find insights in these parables to what I think Jesus actually meant us to be considering that had never occurred to me. That had literally never occurred to me. Like, how does this happen? Well, it's because we're each in our own kind of, we're sheep of of different folds, and we are practicing the same 4G values, but we come at it from a different way, and so we see it differently. So these parables become like turning diamonds, and seeing them from different ways, and enabling us to become better practitioners of the Christian faith. Let me give you another example. Just take that love your neighbors yourself. Like, okay, we ask a Christian, what does it mean to love your neighbors yourself? And well, we point to Jesus' own parable, what he used to illustrate the Good Samaritan. Like, and we say, well, you got to kind of love everybody who's in trouble. Okay, that's wonderful, but that's also very abstract. When I asked an imam and a rabbi from the Tri-Faith Initiative this very question, what does it mean in your community to love your neighbor as yourself? Well, the rabbi said, "Oh, well, that's that. I think about the mitzvah. Every day a mitzvah is something you do that is above and beyond the call of duty to help another person, and every day you are commanded to do a mitzvah." And as soon as he said that, I remembered that, like, when I was in New Jersey, I was working as a part-time interim at a church far away from where I lived, and my car broke down one day. And we had this Jewish couple that would regularly come to our church because I like to preach from the Old Testament, because that was my focus at Princeton. And they said, "Oh, would you need a ride?" And I'm like, "Well, no, this is an hour car ride, just to get me home." And they said, "Well, no, we'd be fine with that." I'm like, "No." And they go, "No, you'd help us because we haven't done our mitzvah for the day." You're helping us. And I'm like, okay, well, I felt a little bit less guilty about it. Okay, if I'm helping you, then. But I thought that was such an extraordinary thing, to every day, what are you going to do above and beyond for the neighbor? Like, wow, that's a really concrete, beautiful way to act out. And I asked my imam friend, what does it mean in your community? He said, well, there's this hadith. That's a story about Muhammad. It's not in the Quran, but it's called a strong hadith. They think it is probably something that Muhammad literally said, because he was asked that very question. Who is my neighbor? And he said, count 40 houses this way, 40 houses that way, 40 houses this way, and 40 houses that way. Those are your neighbors. You need to take care of them. I thought it was like, wow. My neighborhood, I might know 3 of my neighbors. I was living in Omaha at the time. I thought that is a really good challenge. How many of my neighbors can I get to know, and just imagine if people took that seriously. I don't know what you do in an apartment building, then you got people up and people down too, but if people actually took that seriously, as they do in the Middle East, if you actually see people doing that, they have such a profound sense of community. And when you think about one of the greatest health crises is in the United States, that the Surgeon General just said, is loneliness. Wow. And so that's what I mean about, like, if we can turn these other faiths that are practicing a 4G way of life, have these gifts to share that make us actually better practitioners of the Christian faith. And so that's part of what I want to do is if I do serve another settled call, is I want to look to how we can engage with our sisters and brothers of other faiths to understand our own Christian faith better. And yeah. And incidentally, I will say that the most Christian community I've seen in probably the last 20 years was Gandhi's ashram in Ahmedabad, India, that I visited 2 years ago. They're Hindus, but they out-Christianed us by like leaps and leaps and bounds. And so I also want to create a community that looks like Gandhi's ashram in terms of helping the community in very deep, really deep ways of serving the communities, people who are outcast and on the margins.
Well, we won't be out-Christianed by anybody, let me tell you. Okay, back to the room. Yes, Beryl.
I've been trying to catch on to how you're defining this Christian pluralism and how it's distinguished from progressive Christianity. And you want to define that, sharpen that up a little bit more for us? So where
Sure.
you get that concept?
Yeah, so it simplifies it a little bit. And it also takes it out of the realm it makes it more directly about theology than politics and even social values. I haven't drifted away from the social values I have or the political values I have at all. But this is more tightly focused on, I think that if people were Christian, if Christian pluralists were a thing, Christian nationalism would not be a thing. It's because if you acknowledge that there might be other paths that also are, get us to heaven, for instance, then you've taken away 90% of what motivates a Christian nationalist to be a Christian nationalist, and motivates people to really do harm to other people in the name of love. When I wrote the Asphalt Jesus, which is the follow-up to the Phoenix Affirmations, there was a section in it that the publisher actually asked me to take out because they thought it would be too controversial. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that they finally convinced me to take it out. I wish I would have. They said I could leave it in, and I wish I would have. But it was, I had this speculation, like, what if I were Satan and God said, listen, you can you can do whatever you want, provided you don't affect people's free will, and I'll let you do it in order to undermine everything that Christ came to stand for. And I thought about that, like, what would I do if I was Satan and God gave me free reign to do anything I wanted, as long as I didn't break people's free will? And I realized I'd only do one thing. I'd only ask for one thing. And that is, I would like to implant in people's psyche the suggestion, not even the absolute certainty, but the suggestion that if they don't please the God of their understanding in a certain way, that this God would burn them and torture them, for all of eternity. And the reason why that would be so successful at overturning Jesus's whole program is because every bit of love a person feels then would be directed and twisted in ways to manipulate and cause people to try to convert to your way of life. So, if I think there's a 2% chance that my children will be going to hell if they don't believe a certain way, well, my gosh, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to force my kids to, be Christian no matter what. I'm going to force my friends as best I can. In fact, if I don't even know you, the sure sign of my love is if we're not even friends. Maybe we're enemies, but I'm still going to try to convert you by hook or by crook. That's like the greatest sign of love, right? Because I'm trying to save even my enemy from this horrible, torturous, existence. So every bit of love, every bit of compassion is turned into fear. And manipulation, then it's all like, just give me that, God, and I'm good. And
Wow.
So to me, Christian pluralism kind of strikes at what I call the weak belly of the dragon. Fundamentalism to me is like a dragon that has inch thick scales and armor. And we in the more progressive community, we keep thinking if we just fire our little arrows of science and this, like we can, or just intellect, we can just pierce that armor. But it's more like toothpicks that bounce off the armor, but the underbelly is very weak. The underbelly is that theology, and so to me, Christian pluralism gets right at the heart of that underbelly, that weak underbelly, because it's not theologically sustainable. It's not scripturally sustainable. I mean, there's a reason why Paul, the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, not once speaks of hell. And there's a reason why every time Jesus mentions the word that's translated as hell, he's not talking about the hell that we think of. He's talking about a garbage dump on the outskirts of the Jerusalem, walls called Gehenna that was used for burning trash. And every time that Jesus spoke about salvation, and in fact, back when we were in the pastor theologian program, one of my papers was about this. I looked at every instance in which Jesus himself talked about salvation. What did he mean by that? And in 95% of those instances, it was about healing from a physical disease or healing from some sort of like social rupture between people. That was when he's talking about salvation coming. He was experiencing that. So to me, that's the big payoff of Christian pluralism is we're no longer throwing all of the planet into hellfire who's not part of our faith, and we are helping to release a great deal of joy within sincere people of faith who do believe that God throws people into hell like this. We're saying, you know what, our God is a lot more loving than you suspect. There's a lot of people you love and you care about, you thought they were going to hell, but God is a lot more caring for them than you ever would suspect. There are many paths to God, so let's get on having a deeper relationship with this God that is based in the love and the joy rather than the fear and the terror.
All right. Thank you. Don, let's make this one John to you, okay? All right.
I'm a visual learner, and I've been intrigued by your cover since the very beginning when I first opened the third chapter. And it looks like there's a rusty nail that has put this poster whose edges have been singed. What's the significance of that? Is that a door? Is that a church wall? Or what did you envision with this cover? Because there's a lot of meaning that could be put into it.
Back to Luther. Give it to us.
Exactly. That's Mark is exactly right. That's an allusion to Luther's nailing the 95 Theses, according to the mythology, to the Wittenberg door.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is meant to be, there might be a little backlash to it.
Yeah.
His weren't singed, though.
I think that's made it supposed to look old. So, all right. Well, thank you, Eric. Let me tell you a couple of things that we are up to. We have hosted a couple of events that those of us in the planning part of it, most people don't know this, we call it a new map. We're just trying to re-envision things. I don't know if you know Paul Capitz, who is an out gay Methodist minister who taught at Union Seminary in Virginia for a time, and then the Twin Cities, but he's now in our area. And so we've all been working together, and we had a day-long workshop last year on LGBTQ issues. This year we hosted the movie called True Believer. It's a documentary, partly produced by one of our members. And in a couple of weeks, we have the Gay Pride Parade is October 5th. And then October 6th, we're doing our next iteration of the new map. And we're calling it Christian pluralism as opposed to Christian nationalism.
Oh,
We did that apart from you, but I'm glad that we did it in sync with you. But
wow.
we were looking for a phrase that didn't just say we're anti-Christian nationalism. What are we? And we are Christian pluralism. And we're looking at the way that term works, not only theologically, but politically and so forth. I thought you'd enjoy that. I can send you little bits and pieces if that makes you happy.
That would make me happy, yes.
All right. Well, on behalf of the congregation, I think all of us in here would like to thank you for the work that you did.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with it too. You've been a delightful group. Great questions.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to come and join us. We're going to sign off now, and then I'll say goodbyes to the group and let them know what's coming up next as far as our text study routine is concerned. But thanks, Eric. I'm sorry you're not going to be joining us in San Diego. I think so far it's just Bill Brown and me at this point.
Oh, okay. Bill,
we'll do our best.
yeah.
All right.
Great.
Take care.
All right. Take care. Good to see
All
you.
righty.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.